I want you to imagine inheriting an empire at the absolute peak of its power. I mean, you have unlimited wealth.
Right.
You have massive, highly trained armies, unprecedented technological advancement, and you even have this direct documented line to the divine. You are standing on the very summit of human achievement.
Yeah, it was the dream scenario. Or so you'd think.
Exactly, because then you have to watch your descendants completely systematically tear it apart, piece by piece, generation by generation, until there is literally nothing left but ash.
It is honestly the ultimate nightmare of inheritance. You spend your entire life building this unbreakable system, only to realize the people you are handing it to are the very ones who will dismantle it.
And usually when we want to study how a system breaks down, we use, a diagnostic approach, like in medicine. If you break your arm and X-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor points to it and says, there's the fracture, it's visible, it's binary, broken or not broken.
Which is comforting, in a way. I mean, we like failures to be easily categorizable. We want a single point of failure we can point to and say, yep, that's where it all went wrong.
But when you step into the world of human psychology, generational trauma, and societal collapse, that diagnostic X-ray machine is just totally useless. We are looking at a landscape that is murky and really complex. So today, we are turning that diagnostic lens away from the human body and pointing it directly at human history. Welcome to a custom-tailored deep dive. The source material we have today is essentially an autopsy of a nation.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, we're looking at an ancient, sweeping historical text. It's called The Throne of David, Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, which is drawn from the historical accounts of 2nd Chronicles.
And our mission for this deep dive is to map out the entire life cycle of a dynasty. We're going to track the patterns of leadership, the incredibly corrupting influence of pride, the desperate attempts at reform, and the ultimate inevitable collapse.
Right, because this isn't just a timeline of dates to memorize.
No, not at all. It is a grand saga. It contains incredible heights of wisdom, absolute family betrayal, hidden babies, the invention of ancient artillery, and total destruction.
So we begin where every great collapse starts, right? At a towering peak. We are starting at the absolute zenith of this kingdom under a man named Solomon. Now, if you know the name, you know it is universally synonymous with wealth and wisdom.
Absolutely.
But the way this historical text describes his rise to power is fascinating to me because it begins with what is essentially a divine blank check.
Yeah, the narrative tells us that God appears to Solomon at night and says, simply ask, what shall I give you?
Wow. Just whatever you want.
Literally whatever you want. And you have to pause and consider the psychological weight of that moment. You are the newly minted ruler of a massive, complex population. The creator of the universe offers you anything, unrestricted power.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. It is. And Solomon's response sets the entire tone for his golden age. He doesn't ask for wealth. He doesn't ask for honor or the death of his geopolitical enemies or even a long life for himself. He just asks for wisdom and knowledge to lead the people.
I've always found that profound. It's like the ultimate test of character. Because he didn't ask for the selfish things, he's granted all of them as a massive bonus. It's like finding a genie, wishing for a brilliant strategic mind, and getting a $1 trillion global monopoly thrown in for free.
That is exactly what happens. And the economic boom that follows this decision is just staggering. The text notes that Solomon made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stones.
Or like gravel?
Yes, precious metals treated like gravel. Cedar trees, which were these incredibly luxurious building materials imported from Lebanon, were as abundant as common sycamore trees in the lowlands.
That is absurd wealth.
It's astonishing. But what we really need to look at is the sheer administrative logistics of Solomon's reign. He isn't, a dragon just sitting on a pile of gold in a cave. He is building a highly structured, globalized, and deeply interconnected economy.
Okay, so what does that look like practically?
Well, he begins importing horses and chariots from Egypt and Kiva. He sets up designated chariot cities. He's creating a massive military and trading empire, acting as the ultimate middleman.
Right.
He exports to the Hittites and the kings of Syria. He creates an absolute monopoly on global trade routes in the region.
But all of this wealth, all of this global trade, it all funneled toward one central defining achievement, right?
Yeah.
The grand build.
A temple.
Solomon decides to build a house for the name of the Lord. And the sheer numbers involved in this construction project are mind-numbing. He drafts 153,600 laborers.
That is a massive workforce for the ancient world.
Right. To break that down, that is 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters working in the mountains, and they're all overseen by 3,600 managers.
And we really need to pay very close attention to who exactly is doing this labor.
Who was it?
The text specifically notes that Solomon raised this forced labor from the aliens in the land, so the non-Israelite inhabitants who remain in the territory. It is a highly efficient bureaucracy, sure, but it is built on the backs of a marginalized workforce.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, this is a crucial detail because it hints at a heavily bureaucratic, deeply heavy-handed infrastructure machine humming right beneath all that glittering gold.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Yeah.
Asking for wisdom to govern your people is noble, right?
Yeah.
But when you have an operation where you are forcibly drafting over 150,000 laborers from a specific demographic, isn't there a risk that the machine of the kingdom has already outgrown the wisdom of the leader?
That's a brilliant observation.
It just feels like the seeds of the eventual collapse are being sown in the very foundation of this glorious temple.
That is the exact paradox of Solomon's reign. The administrative logistics and the spiritual centralization are perfectly united, but the human cost is immense. And the opulence of the temple itself reflects this overwhelming scale. I mean, the entire inside of the structure is overlaid with pure gold.
And not just a little gold leaf either. The text says the nails alone weighed 50 shekels of gold. For you listening right now, a single shekel is roughly half an ounce. So 50 shekels is about 1.5 pounds of pure gold.
For a single nail.
For a single nail. And he carves 2 giant cherubim, these angelic figures for the inner sanctum, with a combined wingspan of 20 cubits.
Right, and a cubit is the length from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, so roughly 18 inches. So a 20-cubit wingspan is about 30 feet across.
That's the width of a modern house.
30 feet of gold-overlaid statues. And outside, he makes a massive bronze basin called the sea for the priests to wash in. It holds 3,000 baths of water.
How much is a bath?
A bath is an ancient liquid measurement of about 6 gallons. So we are talking about an 18,000-gallon cast bronze pool resting on the backs of 12 cast bronze oxen.
That's insane. The engineering required to cast that much bronze in a single piece in the ancient world is just staggering.
And the dedication ceremony matches the architecture in its overwhelming, almost terrifying scale. When Solomon finishes his prayer of dedication, the text records that fire comes down from heaven and consumes the sacrifices.
Oh, wait, literally fire from the sky.
Yes, and the glory of the Lord fills the temple so densely that the priests physically cannot enter the building. Following this, Solomon sacrifices 22,000 bulls and 120,000 sheep.
Hold on, 140,000 animals?
Yep.
The logistics of just managing that event are incomprehensible. The butchers, the blood, the sheer volume of material moving through Jerusalem in those weeks. It's industrial-scale worship.
Which is exactly why Solomon's kingdom becomes famous. It isn't just the spiritual element, you know? It is the organizational prowess that blows people away. Which brings us to the famous visit of the Queen of Sheba.
Right.
She travels from southern Arabia to Jerusalem with a massive retinue, bringing camels bearing spices and gold, specifically to test Solomon with hard questions.
She wants to see if the rumors are true.
Exactly, and she is left completely breathless. But notice what the historical record says actually leaves her breathless. It wasn't just the gold.
Oh, this is the best part. She saw the wisdom of Solomon, the house he built, the food on his table, and then it lists the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, and their apparel.
It is the ultimate display of systemic order. She is overwhelmed by the seating charts, the uniforms of the waitstaff, the precise, flawless execution of his court.
So it's not just that he's rich.
Yeah.
It's that he's organized.
Yes. It demonstrates that in this golden age, true power is perceived through order, structure, and predictability just as much as through sheer wealth. He has 4,000 stalls for horses, 12,000 horsemen. His drinking vessels are all pure gold. He receives a staggering 666 talents of gold a year in revenue.
A talent is about 75 pounds. So that's roughly 50,000 pounds of gold flowing into the city every single year. It is the absolute peak of human achievement in this era.
But peaks are incredibly dangerous places to stand.
Because the horizon offers nowhere to go but down.
Exactly. The fundamental question becomes, how do you sustain a system that relies on both perfect divine alignment and flawlessly executed massive human bureaucracy? What happens when the founder dies?
Which brings us to the transition. How do you lose a golden age? The answer, apparently, is that you take the massive, incredibly efficient infrastructure built by your brilliant father and you use it to crush your own people.
Yes.
Solomon eventually dies after 40 years on the throne. He leaves this glittering, heavy machine to his son, Rehoboam.
The reign of Rehoboam is quite literally a masterclass in how to destroy an empire in 3 days. It is a terrifying study in the psychology of inherited power.
Break down those 3 days for me, because to go from 50,000 pounds of gold a year to a fractured nation in 72 hours requires a special kind of incompetence.
It really does. It begins with a negotiation. Rehoboam steps up to the throne, and the people of Israel, led by a man named Jeroboam, who had previously fled to Egypt to escape Solomon's heavy hand, come to the new king with a very reasonable labor union request.
Okay, what do they want?
They say to Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you."
This confirms exactly what we suspected earlier about Solomon's massive building projects. The Golden Age was heavy, the taxation, the forced labor, the massive logistics. It exhausted the working class. The people are basically saying the temple is built, the cities are fortified, can we please just go back to our farms and rest?
Precisely. Rehoboam tells them to give him 3 days to think about it. And initially, he does exactly what a wise leader should do. He consults the seasoned elders who had stood before his father, Solomon, men who understood the complex machinery of the state.
And the elders give him profound systemic advice.
Yeah.
They tell him, if you are kind to these people and please them and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. It's servant leadership 101.
Yes.
They understand that the monarchy only exists by the consent and the strength of the populace.
Yeah.
Give them a little breathing room, and you buy their loyalty for a lifetime.
But Rehoboam fundamentally rejects this advice. And the psychological pivot here is crucial. He dismisses the elders and instead turns to the young men who had grown up with him, his peers. The other privileged kids who had lived in the golden palaces, completely insulated from the heavy yoke of the working class.
I am fascinated by this moment. Rehoboam consulting his childhood friends is the original historical echo chamber.
Right.
He isn't actually looking for advice from them. He's looking for validation. He wants someone to tell him what his ego desperately needs to hear.
And they deliver exactly what his ego demands. They feed his worst impulses. They tell him to go back to the people and say, "My little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges."
Scourges being whips with, like, metal or bone attached.
Exactly. A scourge is designed to tear flesh.
It's an astonishingly stupid PR strategy. Let's unpack the psychology of that thicker than my father's waist comment. It strikes me as the ultimate manifestation of inherited privilege, masking deep, crippling insecurity.
Absolutely.
Rehoboam knows he didn't build this empire. He doesn't possess his father's wisdom, but he feels utterly entitled to wield the power of the throne, and he's terrified of looking weak.
You've hit the nail on the head. He hasn't earned the respect of the people who actually maintain the empire, so he attempts to manufacture respect through terror and domination. The elders advised him to earn authority through service. His peers advised him to enforce authority through brutality.
And the result of this speech is an instant, catastrophic fracture. The 10 northern tribes hear this absolute disaster of his speech, and their response is immediate. They say, "What share have we in David? To your tents, O Israel." They rebel on the spot.
Just like that.
The kingdom violently splits in half, never to be reunited. Jeroboam takes the 10 northern tribes, which becomes the kingdom of Israel. Rehoboam is left in the south with only Judah and Benjamin. In one conversation, the golden age shatters.
And the physical decline of the kingdom mirrors the political fracture almost immediately. Because Rehoboam and his kingdom forsake the foundational laws that made them strong, they lose their geopolitical protection. Shishak, the king of Egypt, sees the weakness and attacks Jerusalem with a massive army.
Oh, mess.
1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen. And Shishak marches right into Jerusalem and takes away the treasures of the house of the Lord. He takes the wealth. But most symbolically, he takes the solid gold shields that Solomon had made.
This detail is one of the most memorable in the entire chronicle. The gold shields. The literal reflections of the golden age are stolen. So what does Rehoboam do? He doesn't repent. He doesn't rebuild the wealth. He makes cheap bronze shields to replace them.
Yeah.
He gives these bronze shields to the guards at the doorway of the king's house. Whenever the king went into the temple, the guards would bring out the bronze shields to make it look grand, and then the moment the procession was over, they would rush them right back into the guard room.
It is perhaps the most poignant visual metaphor for a collapsing system in the text. The bronze shields represent the illusion of power after the actual substance is gone. They are going through the motions of empire. They are holding up polished bronze, desperately pretending it's gold, hoping nobody notices that the treasury is empty and the empire has been hollowed out.
To everyone listening to this deep dive right now, I want you to pause and think about the bronze shields in your own life or organization. How often do modern companies do exactly this?
Oh, all the time.
Right. The core product begins to fail. The internal culture becomes toxic. But instead of fixing the systemic rot, leadership spends millions on a rebrand, a shiny new PR campaign, or an elaborate office space. They polish the bronze, hoping the shareholders or the employees don't notice that the gold is gone.
It happens constantly in corporate leadership, in politics, and even in personal lives. We maintain the optics of success long after the reality of success has departed. And from this fracture, we enter a long, exhausting period where the kingdom becomes a pendulum, swinging wildly between kings who attempt to restore the gold and kings who settle for the bronze.
We see a rapid succession of this pendulum swing. You have Rehoboam's son, Abijah, who actually relies on God and manages to defeat Jeroboam's army of 800,000 with only 400,000 men. It's a miraculous, against all odds victory. And then you have his son, Asa. Now, Asa is a fascinating study in how a good start does not guarantee a good finish.
Asa begins his reign as a powerful reformer. He cleanses the land of idols. He faces down an Ethiopian army of 1,000,000 men. And in that moment of crisis, he cries out to the Lord with profound faith, saying, "Lord, it is nothing for you to help, whether with many or with those who have no power," and he wins a decisive victory.
But then, decades later, Asa faces a much smaller threat from the king of Israel. And instead of relying on the faith that saved him from a 1,000,000-man army, he panics. He empties his own temple treasury to buy a political treaty with the king of Syria.
A seer named Hanani confronts Asa about this. He reminds the king that he relied on God for the massive Ethiopian army, so why is he relying on bribery and foreign alliances now? But Asa, rather than accepting the correction, is enraged. He has the prophet thrown into prison and begins to oppress his own people.
He transforms from a faithful savior into a paranoid tyrant. And the text knows that Asa eventually develops a severe foot disease. But it includes this deeply tragic caveat. It says, "Yet in his disease he did not seek the Lord, but the physicians." Now, I'm assuming the text isn't like anti-medicine.
No, it's not a condemnation of medicine at all. It is a commentary on Asa's ultimate trajectory. He had completely localized his trust in human physical solutions. He trusted a Syrian treaty over divine protection, and he trusted the physicians over divine healing. He forgot how to trust the foundational architecture of his faith in the slow burn of daily governance and personal health.
Which ushers in the reign of his son, Jehoshaphat. Yeah. And Jehoshaphat is largely a righteous king, an administrator who tries to rebuild the internal structure of the nation.
Right, he sends teachers throughout the cities of Judah with the book of the law to educate the public. He establishes a legitimate, decentralized judicial system, explicitly telling his judges, "Take heed to what you are doing, for you do not judge for man, but for the Lord. There is no partiality nor taking of bribes."
Jehoshaphat is building a robust civil society based on justice and education. He becomes incredibly powerful and wealthy because of this internal stability. But as we see time and time again in this text, massive success often breeds terrible judgment.
Oh, yes.
Jehoshaphat makes a fateful decision to ally himself through marriage with the absolute worst, most idolatrous king of the northern kingdom of Israel, King Ahab.
This alliance is a disaster waiting to happen. The text says Jehoshaphat goes up to visit Ahab in Samaria. Ahab throws a massive, lavish banquet, slaughtering sheep and oxen in abundance, and uses the hospitality to pressure Jehoshaphat into going to war with him against a territory called Ramoth Gilead.
Jehoshaphat feels the pressure, but he tries to retain some of his spiritual integrity. He says to Ahab, "Let's inquire for the word of the Lord first. Let's see if this war is a good idea."
And Ahab, who has essentially created a spiritual echo chamber of his own, brings in 400 of his yes-men prophets, and predictably, all 400 of them say exactly what Ahab wants to hear. "Go up, for God will deliver it into the king's hand."
But Jehoshaphat isn't an idiot. He can smell the sycophancy. He looks at these 400 prophets and basically asks, is there not still a legitimate prophet of the Lord here we can ask?
And Ahab's response is one of the most perfectly petty, revealing lines in ancient history. Ahab says, "There is still one man, but I hate him, because he never prophesies good concerning me, but always evil. His name is Micaiah."
Ahab openly admits he only values prophecy that validates his own desires. It's wild.
Well,
So they reluctantly bring Micaiah in. Micaiah delivers a vision that is one of the most complex, staggering theological concepts in the entire chronicle.
Yes. Micaiah says he saw a vision of the Lord sitting on his throne, asking the spiritual host of heaven, who will persuade Ahab, king of Israel, to go up, that he may fall at Ramoth-Gilead. And a spirit steps forward and says, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And the Lord permits it.
Okay, I have to push back hard here because I'm struggling to understand this. God literally permits a lying spirit to actively deceive 400 prophets. That sounds like cosmic entrapment.
I know, it really does.
If God is the ultimate standard of truth, how does he deploy a spirit of deception? How can anyone trust anything if the spiritual realm operates with disinformation campaigns?
It's a brilliant question, and it's a theological paradox that has troubled readers for centuries. But we have to look at the mechanism of what is actually happening here. This is not God deceiving an innocent man.
Okay.
Ahab has spent his entire life actively suppressing the truth, murdering true prophets, and demanding lies that suit his political agenda. He has built a massive infrastructure of deception.
Right, the 400 yes men.
Exactly. The vision Micaiah describes is essentially a judicial decree. God is saying, Ahab, you have demanded a reality built on lies. You have surrounded yourself with men who will only speak lies. Therefore, your judgment is that you will be completely handed over to the very deception you demanded. God permits the lying spirit as an agent of judgment, giving Ahab exactly what he wanted, which ultimately leads to his destruction.
Wow. That reframes it entirely. It's not entrapment. It's the ultimate consequence of an echo chamber. If you demand that reality conform to your ego, reality will eventually conspire to destroy you using your own demands. God doesn't have to trick Ahab. He just lets Ahab's own artificial reality play out to its logical conclusion.
Precisely. And despite Micaiah clearly explaining this entire mechanism to Ahab's face, Ahab refuses to listen. He throws Micaiah in prison and goes to battle anyway, but he's terrified. He knows deep down the prophecy might be true.
So what does he do?
He devises a cowardly plan. He tells Jehoshaphat, I'm going to disguise myself as a regular foot soldier, but you put on your royal kingly robes. Ahab is actively trying to dodge his prophesied fate while simultaneously using his political ally as a brightly colored target.
That is the ultimate betrayal of an ally.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy, wear the shiny robes so they shoot at you.
Exactly.
And the battle plays out like a Greek tragedy. The Syrian army commanders have been given one specific order: ignore the foot soldiers, only hunt down the king of Israel. So they see Jehoshaphat in his royal robes and surround him.
Yeah.
Jehoshaphat cries out, and the text says God moves the Syrians to turn away from him once they realize he isn't Ahab.
But Ahab, hiding in his clever disguise, blending in with the chaotic mass of infantry, cannot escape the decree of his own destruction. The text gives us this incredibly fateful sentence. Now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor.
A completely random arrow. An unnamed soldier pulls back a bowstring, aims at absolutely nothing in particular, and releases it blindly into the sky. And that specific arrow finds the tiny millimeter-wide gap in the armor of a king who thought he could disguise his way out of consequence.
It's incredible.
Ahab props himself up in his chariot, bleeding out all day, and dies at sunset. You simply cannot outsmart the architecture of your own downfall.
Ahab dies, but the fallout of Jehoshaphat's alliance with Ahab's family does not end there. In fact, the rot from that marriage alliance has already crossed the border and infected the royal line of Judah in Jerusalem. This marked a profound shift in our historical narrative.
The tone completely changes here.
It does. The sweeping geopolitics of massive armies and global trade routes fall away, and the story suddenly constricts into a claustrophobic, suffocating, bloody family survival thriller.
It gets incredibly dark from here. Jehoshaphat dies, and his oldest son Jehoram takes the throne. Now, Jehoram is married to Athaliah, who's a daughter of Ahab. So the toxicity of the northern kingdom has officially infiltrated the southern kingdom.
Right.
And the very first thing Jehoram does upon securing the throne is almost unspeakable. He takes a sword and systematically murders every single one of his own brothers. The entire royal family, butchered just to eliminate any potential political rivals.
He brings the ruthless, paranoid, idolatrous practices of Ahab's house right into the heart of David's lineage. He forces the inhabitants of Jerusalem into idolatry under threat of violence. But his atrocities do not go unanswered. Jehoram receives a letter.
And what makes this letter unique is that it comes from Elijah the prophet. This is one of the only times the legendary northern prophet Elijah interacts directly with the southern kingdom in this specific chronicle.
And it is not a polite letter. It is a doom scroll.
Yeah, let me read part of it. Elijah writes, "Because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel and have made Judah play the harlot." Wait, sorry, let me restart that. "Because
Oh.
you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and have made Judah play the harlot, and also have killed your brothers who were better than yourself, behold, the Lord will strike your people with a serious affliction, and you will become very sick with a disease of your intestines, until your intestines come out by reason of the sickness, day by day."
It is a horrific prophecy, and it is fulfilled with macabre precision. Philistines and Arabians invade the territory. They break into Jehoram's house and carry away all his immense wealth, all his wives and all his sons, except the very youngest. He loses everything he murdered his brothers to secure.
And then the disease hits.
Yes. And then he is struck with an incurable intestinal disease. After 2 agonizing years, the text says his intestines fall out and he dies in severe pain.
And his death brings us to one of the saddest, most damning epitaphs in recorded history. The text simply states that Jehoram departed to no one's sorrow.
Mm.
The people didn't make a ceremonial fire for him like they did for his ancestors, and they completely refused to bury him in the tombs of the kings. He died in agony, completely unloved, unrespected, and unmourned by the very people he terrorized.
But the nightmare is far from over. Jehoram's one surviving son, Ahaziah, takes the throne. He is young and he only rules for 1 year, primarily because his mother, Athaliah, Ahab's daughter, is actively advising him to act wickedly. Ahaziah gets caught up in a violent political purge occurring up north in Israel, and he is executed.
And this is the moment where Athaliah, the queen mother, makes her terrifying move.
Yeah.
I want to spend some time on this because the psychology of Athaliah is chilling. Seeing that her son is dead, she doesn't mourn, she doesn't prepare for a successor, she decides to seize the throne of Judah for herself. And to guarantee her absolute power, she orders the systematic execution of all the royal heirs.
Her own grandchildren.
She orders the murder of her own grandchildren. It is like a hostile corporate takeover from the inside, where the new CEO decides to literally burn the entire board of directors alive, even though they're her own flesh and blood.
It is an act of supreme psychopathic paranoia. She almost succeeds in entirely wiping out the line of David, the very bloodline that God had explicitly promised would endure forever. The profound fragility of this entire dynasty is brutally exposed right here.
Yeah.
Think about it. All of Solomon's incredible gold, all of Jehoshaphat's massive armies, the fortifications, the global trade, none of it mattered. The survival of the entire nation comes down to a single desperate moment in a palace bedroom.
The hidden baby. Amidst the screaming and the bloodshed of Athaliah's purge, a woman named Jehoshaphat, the sister of the dead king and the wife of the high priest Jehoiada, sneaks into the royal nursery. She steals a tiny infant named Joash, one of the royal grandsons, and hides him and his nurse in a bedroom while the assassins pass by.
It sounds like the plot of a high fantasy novel, but the Chronicle presents it as the absolute hinge of historical fact. Jehoshaphat and her husband smuggle the infant into the vast, complex chambers of the Temple of God.
Right under Athaliah's nose.
Exactly. And for 6 long, terrifying years, while the murderous usurper Athaliah rules the nation with an iron fist, the true, legitimate heir to the throne of David is a toddler, playing quietly in the hidden rooms of the sanctuary.
The tension of those 6 years must have been suffocating. Keeping a child silent, smuggling in food, knowing that if Athaliah's spies hear a child crying behind a temple wall, the entire bloodline ends. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada, the high priest, decides the boy is old enough and the nation is weary enough. He orchestrates a brilliant tactical coup.
Jehoiada is not just a spiritual leader. He proves to be a master tactician. He covertly gathers the captains of hundreds and the Levites from around the country. He brings them to the temple on the Sabbath.
Why the Sabbath specifically?
This is a vital strategic detail. During the Sabbath, there is a changing of the temple guard. By orchestrating the coup at this exact moment, Jehoiada has 2 shifts of guards present at once, doubling his manpower inside the temple walls without raising any suspicion from Athaliah's palace guards outside.
It's brilliant logistical planning. He surrounds the young boy with armed guards, and the weaponry Jehoiada issues to these guards is dripping with historical symbolism. He doesn't just hand out standard-issue swords. He arms the Levites with King David's old spears and shields that had been stored in the temple treasury for over a century.
I love that detail.
They're literally taking up the rusted weapons of the nation's founding father to protect his last remaining 7-year-old descendant.
The symbolism is so powerful. They bring out the 7-year-old boy Joash. They put the royal crown on his head. And crucially, they hand him the testimony. The testimony is a copy of the Mosaic Law, the foundational constitution of the nation.
Showing that the king is under the law.
By handing this to the king, they are signifying exactly that. The king is not above the law, he is subject to it. They anoint him with oil, and the entire temple erupts in shouts of, "Long live the king."
The noise of the trumpets and the cheering is so deafening that Athaliah actually hears it from the royal palace. She comes running into the temple courtyard, and what she sees must have shattered her reality. She sees a 7-year-old king standing by his royal pillar, surrounded by commanders, trumpeters, and a rejoicing nation, and she tears her clothes, screaming, "Treason! Treason!"
The profound irony of the murderous usurper screaming treason when the rightful heir is revealed. Jehoiada is meticulous even in this moment. He commands the military captains to take Athaliah outside the temple gates. He refuses to let her blood defile the house of the Lord, and they execute her at the entrance of the horse gate. And just like that, the Davidic line is pulled back from the brink of extinction.
And for a while, it seems like a fairy tale ending. Joash's early reign is a golden era of restoration. He grows up and orders the priests to gather money to repair the temple, which had been broken into, neglected, and defiled by Athaliah's sons. They set up a collection box at the gate, the people rejoice to give their money, and they hire masons and carpenters to restore the house of God to its original condition.
Right, and the text notes that Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest.
Wait, say that again? All the days of Jehoiada?
Yes, and we have to pay very close attention to that phrasing. Joash is a compliant, effective king as long as his mentor is alive to guide him. Jehoiada lives an astonishingly long life, dying at 130 years old. He is such an anchor of national stability that they actually bury him among the kings, an unprecedented honor for a priest because of the profound good he did for Israel. But the moment Jehoiada is placed in the ground, Joash's character completely disintegrates.
It is a sudden and terrifying collapse. Joash immediately starts listening to the sycophantic advice of the local leaders. He abandons the temple he just spent years repairing. He serves wooden images and idols. It reveals a deeply unsettling psychological reality about Joash. He is the ultimate cautionary tale of a borrowed compass.
That is an excellent way to phrase it. Joash had internalized the rules of his mentor, but he never internalized the reasoning, the conviction, or the personal relationship with the divine that generated those rules. His morality was entirely externalized in the person of Jehoiada. Once that external conscience was removed, Joash had absolutely no internal true north to guide him.
And his lack of an internal compass leads to an act of staggering betrayal. God sends prophets to warn the nation to bring them back. One of those prophets is Zechariah. And Zechariah is not just a random preacher. He is the son of Jehoiada. He is the son of the man who saved Joash's life, the man who engineered his crown. Zechariah stands above the people and says, "Because you have forsaken the Lord, he also has forsaken you." So what does Joash do? He doesn't repent. He gets angry. He orders the people to conspire against Zechariah, and they stone him to death with stones in the courtyard of the house of the Lord.
It's awful.
Joash murders the son of his savior in the very courtyard of the temple where he himself was hidden and protected as an infant.
It is a betrayal that echoes through the rest of the text. As Zechariah is dying under the stones, he cries out, "The Lord look on it and repay." And the repayment is swift and humiliating. A very small company of the Syrian army invades Judah. The text explicitly states that the Lord delivered a very great army of Judah into the hands of the small Syrian band as a judgment. The Syrians destroy the leaders, take the plunder, and leave Joash severely wounded.
But the Syrians don't kill him. His own people do. His own servants conspire against him specifically to avenge the blood of Jehoiada's son. They assassinate Joash in his own bed. He is dead, and the people refuse to bury him in the tombs of the kings. From the miraculous hidden baby to a murdered, ungrateful tyrant. It is a devastating character arc.
And this tragedy forces us to confront a new phase in our timeline. If Joash's life demonstrates the fatal danger of dependency and a borrowed compass, the generations that followed demonstrate that massive, unchecked success can be just as dangerous. This brings us to a period defined by the paradox of success, ultimately leading the kingdom into its deepest, darkest despair.
We see this pattern clearly with Joash's son, Amaziah. Amaziah starts off gathering a massive army of 300,000 men from Judah to fight their enemies in Edom. But he feels he needs more, so he pays 100 talents of silver to hire 100,000 mercenaries from the northern kingdom of Israel.
But a man of God comes to him and warns him that God is not with the northern kingdom, and if he takes these mercenaries into battle, he will fall. Amaziah is worried about the money he already spent. He asks, But what shall we do about the 100 talents? And the man of God replies with a profound economic truth. The Lord is able to give you much more than this.
So Amaziah actually listens. He discharges the mercenaries, takes the financial loss, goes to war with his own men, and wins a massive, brutal victory against Edom, capturing 10,000 men and executing them by throwing them off a rock cliff. But then Amaziah does the most baffling, illogical thing in the entire historical record.
He really does.
He returns from slaughtering the Edomites, bringing the idols and gods of the people he just utterly defeated. He sets them up in Jerusalem, bows down to them, and burns incense to them. I just cannot wrap my mind around this. He literally adopts the loser's playbook.
I know, it makes no sense.
A prophet comes to him and asks the most obvious question. Why have you sought the gods of the people, which could not rescue their own people from your hand? Why worship the gods of the army you just slaughtered?
It defies all logic, but it speaks to the intoxicating, blinding nature of military pride. Amaziah feels so invincible that he believes he can conquer not just the physical territory, but the spiritual pantheon of his enemies. He tells the prophet to shut up. He then arrogantly challenges the king of Israel to a battle, gets absolutely crushed. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, the temple is plundered, and he is eventually assassinated by his own people.
Which clears the stage for his son Uzziah. Now, Uzziah is a deeply fascinating figure. He takes the throne at 16 years old, and he grows into a true Renaissance man. He is a military genius, an administrative powerhouse, and an innovator.
Yeah, he builds towers in Jerusalem, he digs wells in the desert, he has massive agricultural operations, vineyards and flocks, because the text says he loved the soil.
He fundamentally changes the technological and military landscape of the entire region. He organizes a highly disciplined army of over 307,500 men. But his crowning achievement is his innovation. The text states he made devices in Jerusalem, invented by skillful men, to be placed on the towers and corners to shoot arrows and large stones.
He essentially invents ancient artillery, ballistas and catapults. His army is equipped with cutting-edge shields, spears, helmets, and body armor. His fame spreads globally, reaching as far as the entrance of Egypt. The text says he was marvelously helped till he became strong. He is the ultimate, untouchable CEO of a thriving mega-state.
But then the text delivers one of the most chilling, concise diagnoses of human failure ever written. It says, but when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction. Uzziah, this incredibly brilliant inventor, this builder of cities, this conqueror, decides one day to walk into the temple of the Lord. He takes a censer, a metal vessel used for burning incense, and steps up to the altar of incense to burn it himself.
And this act triggers an immediate, massive confrontation. Azariah the high priest, along with 80 valiant priests of the Lord, physically stand in the king's way. They confront the most powerful man on earth and say, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have trespassed." And Uzziah becomes furious.
To a modern reader who maybe isn't steeped in ancient temple protocol, this confrontation seems absurd. It feels like a minor HR violation. A zoning issue. The guy invented ancient artillery and stabilized the economy, and he's going to be brought down over holding a smoking metal cup. Why is the text treating a king burning incense like a nuclear meltdown?
Because it is the ultimate test of boundary recognition. In the architecture of this nation, there was a strict, divinely mandated separation of powers between the throne, which is the state, and the temple, which is the spiritual authority. Uzziah has conquered the military realm. He has conquered the agricultural realm. He has conquered the technological realm. His hubris convinces him that there should be no domain on earth where he is not the absolute authority.
Oh, I see.
By taking the censer, he is deciding that the spiritual realm must bow to his ego as well. It is the CEO who decides he doesn't just manage the company's finances, he must also be the infallible pope of his employees' moral lives. He refuses to submit to a system he does not personally control. It is the ultimate manifestation of pride.
And the judgment for crossing that boundary is instantaneous. While Uzziah is standing there enraged, screaming at the priest with the censer in his hand, leprosy breaks out directly on his forehead. The symbol of his internal impurity is suddenly made visible for everyone to see.
Yeah, right on his forehead.
The priests look at his forehead and they physically thrust him out of the temple. In fact, the text says he himself hurried to get out because he knew he had been struck.
The tragedy of Uzziah is profound. The great inventor, the beloved builder of cities, spends the rest of his life living in an isolated quarantine house, entirely cut off from society and from the house of the Lord. His son Jotham has to govern the people in his place. Uzziah's boundless pride resulted in boundless isolation.
Jotham takes over and has a solid, if unremarkable, reign. He builds up the walls, defeats some enemies, but the text notes that the people still acted correctly. The rot of pride and idolatry is festering beneath the surface, and it finally explodes into an absolute nightmare during the reign of Jotham's son, Ahaz. If Solomon's reign represented the kingdom's glittering zenith, Ahaz is its absolute, suffocating nadir. He is the anti-Solomon.
Ahaz is a nightmare of a ruler. He completely abandons the foundational laws, he walks in the ways of the kings of Israel, he makes molded images for the Baals, and he engages in the most horrific, depraved practice of the ancient world. He burns his own children in the fire in the valley of Hinnom, practicing human sacrifice. He sacrifices his own flesh and blood to appease foreign gods.
Because of this profound moral collapse, the geopolitical protection of the kingdom evaporates entirely. God delivers Ahaz into the hand of the king of Syria, who carries away a massive multitude of captives. Then he is delivered into the hand of Pekah, the king of Israel, and the losses are staggering. In a single day, the army of Israel kills 120,000 valiant men of Judah.
And following that slaughter, the Israelites take 200,000 women, sons, and daughters captive, along with massive amounts of plunder, marching them toward the northern capital of Samaria.
I do want to take a quick aside here, because nestled inside this horrific chapter is an incredible moment of humanity. As the victorious Israelite army approaches Samaria with the 200,000 captives, a northern prophet named Oded intercepts them.
This is such a great story.
He stands in front of the army and rebukes them. He says, look, God was angry with Judah, so he delivered them into your hand, but you have killed them in a rage that reaches up to heaven. And now you propose to force these people to be your slaves. Are you not also guilty before the Lord?
It is a stunning intervention. Oded commands the military leaders to release the captives. And remarkably, several of the civic leaders of Ephraim stand up and agree, refusing to let the army bring the captives into the city. They actually take the plunder, clothe all the naked captives, give them sandals, feed them, give them drink, anoint them, put the feeble ones on donkeys, and march them safely back to Jericho. It is a tiny, brilliant spark of compassion in a very dark era.
But that compassion doesn't change Ahaz's trajectory. He learns nothing from his defeats. He's attacked by the Edomites and the Philistines. Desperate, Ahaz strips the temple and the palaces of their treasures to send a massive bribe to Tiglath-Pileser, the terrifying king of Assyria, begging for military help. But the Assyrian king takes the money and just distresses Ahaz further.
Ahaz is trapped in a spiral of despair. In his twisted logic, he looks at the Syrians who defeated him and decides that their gods must be stronger than his god. So he begins sacrificing to the gods of Damascus, hoping they will help him. But the text notes they were the ruin of him and of all Israel.
And then Ahaz commits the ultimate unforgivable act of national self-destruction. He gathers the holy articles of the house of God, takes an axe and cuts them into pieces. And then he walks out of the temple and he literally shuts the doors of Solomon's temple. He boards up the spiritual center of the nation's identity.
It is the ultimate desecration. It isn't just bad management. It is a systemic deletion. By shutting those doors, Ahaz is actively trying to erase the nation's source code. He replaces the temple worship with cheap, unauthorized altars on every corner of Jerusalem. When he finally dies, the people don't even let his body into the royal tombs. The kingdom is effectively dead, the doors are locked, the lights are turned out.
Which brings us to a moment where you'd think the story ends. The empire is fractured, the treasury is empty, the army is dead, and the temple is boarded up. But history is rarely a straight line down. Just when you think the doors are shut forever, a new generation comes along to clear out the trash and discover what was lost. We enter the Renaissance.
And this Renaissance is entirely driven by Ahaz's son, Hezekiah. Hezekiah inherits a broken, humiliated nation, but he wastes zero time. In the very first year of his reign, in the very first month, he marches straight up to the temple complex and swings those doors wide open.
He brings in the priests and the Levites and gives them a blunt command. He says, "Sanctify yourselves and carry out the rubbish from the holy place." The temple hadn't just been closed, it had been used as a dumping ground.
Hezekiah understands a fundamental principle of recovery. You cannot fix the geopolitical threats, the economic collapse, or the military weakness until you restore the core foundational identity of the nation. The priests go in and they spend 16 full days just hauling physical debris, filth, and broken idols out of the temple and dumping it outside the city in the brook Kidron.
They clean the building, they reconstruct the altar, and they restart the sacrifices. They restore the music of David with cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps. It is a massive physical and spiritual cleanup operation. But then Hezekiah does something incredibly bold, something that shows he isn't just trying to save his own borders, he wants to heal the original fracture.
He decides to hold a massive Passover celebration. But he doesn't just invite the people of his own kingdom, Judah. He drafts letters and sends runners across the border, deep into the northern kingdom of Israel. Keep in mind, these are the people who, just a few years earlier, had slaughtered 120,000 men of Judah. Hezekiah's letters say, "Return to the Lord, do not be stiff-necked as your fathers were, but yield yourselves to the Lord."
It is an audacious olive branch. The runners go from city to city in Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, many people mark the messengers and laugh at them, but the text notes that some individuals humble themselves and travel down to Jerusalem.
It becomes an impromptu, desperate, beautiful gathering. But it's so massive and so sudden that they run into logistical problems. They actually have to delay the Passover to the second month because they didn't have enough priests who had properly sanctified themselves. There are so many sacrifices that the priests can't skin all the animals, so they have to authorize the Levites to step in and help with the butchering.
And further than that, a massive multitude of the people who traveled from the north hadn't undergone the proper purification rituals to eat the Passover lamb. Technically, according to the strict letter of the law, they should have been forbidden from participating. But Hezekiah prays a remarkable prayer. He says, "May the good Lord provide atonement for everyone who prepares his heart to seek God, though he is not cleansed according to the purification of the sanctuary."
And God listens to Hezekiah and heals the people. It is a profound moment where the leadership chooses the spirit of the law over the strict, exclusionary letter of the law in order to achieve unity and restoration. They celebrate for 7 days with such joy that they unilaterally decide to stay and celebrate for another 7 days.
It's a massive nation-healing success. But as we know, you don't get a pass on brutal geopolitics just because you had a really good unifying church service. Reality comes knocking at the door. Sennacherib, the terrifying, world-conquering king of Assyria, invades Judah. He lays siege to the fortified cities, capturing them one by one, and begins working his massive war machine toward Jerusalem.
Hezekiah's response to this existential threat is a fascinating dual-layered strategy. It is a perfect blend of practical engineering and spiritual reliance. Pragmatically, he consults with his leaders and they execute a massive infrastructure project. They stop up the water springs and the brook that flows outside the city. Hezekiah says, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?" He denies the enemy the basic resources they need for a long siege. He builds up the broken walls, raises towers, and manufactures weapons in abundance.
He does all the physical work of a military commander. But then he gathers his military captains in the city square and delivers a speech that completely shifts the paradigm. He tells them, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid nor dismayed before the king of Assyria, for there are more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles."
The contrast is clear. Sennacherib brings an arm of flesh. Hezekiah relies on a spiritual reality. But Sennacherib is a master of psychological warfare. He sends his top officials to the walls of Jerusalem. They don't just speak in Aramaic, the diplomatic language. They stand outside the walls and shout in Hebrew, the language of the common people sitting on the wall, specifically to terrify them.
They wage a devastating propaganda campaign. Sennacherib's messengers shout, "Hezekiah is deceiving you. He is going to let you die of famine and thirst. Look at the history books. No god of any nation has ever been able to deliver his people from my hand. I have burned the gods of every other country. Why do you think your God will be any different?"
It is the ultimate terrifying test of Hezekiah's reforms. The logic of the Assyrian king is flawlessly pragmatic. I have the biggest army, therefore your God is irrelevant. Faced with this overwhelming psychological and physical terror, Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah do not surrender. They go into the temple and they pray and cry out to heaven.
And the deliverance they receive is absolute and staggering. The text simply says that the Lord sent an angel who cut down every mighty man of valor, leader, and captain in the camp of the king of Assyria in a single night. A massive military hierarchy wiped out before sunrise.
Sennacherib wakes up to a decimated leadership structure. The siege is broken. He returns to his own land shamefaced. And in a final ironic twist of fate, when he goes into the temple of his own god in Assyria, his own sons assassinate him with the sword. He mocked the God of Jerusalem, only to be murdered in the house of the God he claimed was superior.
Hezekiah is exalted. He becomes incredibly wealthy. He builds the famous water tunnels to bring water inside the city walls. He does have a brief moment of pride later in life, but crucially, he humbles himself, and the wrath of God does not fall in his days. When he dies, the entire nation honors him. And you read this and think, okay, they figured it out. The system is saved.
But the pendulum never stops swinging. Hezekiah is succeeded by his son Manasseh, who rules for 55 years, the longest reign in the Chronicle, and plunges the nation into an abyss of evil that makes Ahaz look tame. We will return to Manasseh's terrifying reign and bizarre redemption shortly because it sets up the final collapse. But I want to fast forward slightly past Manasseh and his brief, wicked son Amon to look at the final great reformer of Judah, Josiah.
Josiah is known as the boy king. He takes the throne at just 8 years old after his father Amon is assassinated. By the time he is 16, he begins to actively seek God. By 20, he launches a violent, uncompromising purge of the land, breaking down the carved images, the altars of Baal, and literally grinding them into dust and scattering the dust on the graves of those who sacrificed to them.
Josiah is uncompromising, but the most profound defining moment of his reign, and perhaps the most crucial metaphor of this entire chronicle, happens when he is 26 years old, during yet another major renovation of the temple.
Yes, this moment is staggering. Josiah has ordered the temple to be repaired. The high priest, Hilkiah, is gathering the money to pay the carpenters and the stone builders, and while they are digging through the treasury, clearing out the rubble, Hilkiah finds something. He finds the book of the law of Moses.
I want every listener to let the weight of that reality sink in. They were renovating the central religious building of their nation, actively trying to restore their faith, but they had completely lost the instruction manual. The very text that defined their existence, the laws given to Moses, had been lost, buried under decades of debris inside the house it was meant to govern.
It is a terrifying realization. It's like moving into a dilapidated family estate, deciding to knock down a wall to fix a leaking pipe, and accidentally discovering the original architectural blueprints hidden in the plaster blueprints that prove the house you thought was just a shack is actually designed to be a palace.
It is the ultimate diagnostic moment. They bring the book to Shaphan the scribe, who reads it aloud to King Josiah. And when Josiah hears the words of the law, the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience, he doesn't rejoice at the historical find. He tears his clothes in absolute horror, because in hearing the pristine blueprints, he realizes how incredibly structurally deformed the house of Judah has become.
He immediately understands the danger. He sends his top officials to inquire of the Lord, saying, "Great is the wrath of the Lord that is poured out on us, because our fathers have not kept the word of the Lord." The officials go to a prophetess named Huldah in Jerusalem, and Huldah delivers a hard, uncompromising truth.
She essentially tells them that the systemic damage to the foundation is too deep to reverse. She says, "Behold, I will bring calamity on this place and on its inhabitants, all the curses that are written in the book, because they have forsaken me. The wrath will not be quenched." But she offers a personal concession to Josiah. Because his heart was tender, because he humbled himself and tore his clothes, he will be gathered to his grave in peace, and his eyes will not see the calamity that is coming.
So Josiah is handed a terminal diagnosis for his nation, but a reprieve for his own lifetime. And what I love about Josiah is that he doesn't use that reprieve as an excuse to give up. He doesn't say, well, it's doomed anyway, might as well coast. He goes into overdrives. He gathers all the elders, goes up to the temple, and reads the entire book of the covenant in their hearing. He makes a massive covenant before the Lord to follow the commandments.
He essentially forces a massive systemic reboot. He holds a Passover celebration that is so meticulous, so grand, and so generous. Josiah personally donates 30,000 lambs and young goats that the text explicitly notes there had been no Passover kept like it since the days of Samuel the prophet. None of the kings of Israel had ever kept such a Passover. He does everything right. He restores the nation to its foundational code.
Which makes the end of his life so deeply puzzling and so incredibly tragic. After all this reform, years later, Necho, the king of Egypt, is marching his massive army north to Carchemish to fight the Babylonians. He is just passing through the territory. Josiah decides to take his army out to intercept him.
And Necho actually tries to stop the battle. He sends messengers to Josiah, explicitly stating, "What have I to do with you, king of Judah? I have not come against you this day, but against the house with which I have war, for God commanded me to make haste. Refrain from meddling with God who is with me, lest he destroy you."
The Egyptian king is literally quoting divine authority, telling Josiah to stand down. But Josiah refuses to listen. And then Josiah does something that should make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He disguises himself to go into battle.
Just like Ahab.
Exactly like Ahab.
Yeah.
The most righteous reformer in the history of the nation mimics the cowardly, fatal tactic of the most wicked king of the north. He disguises himself, goes into the valley of Megiddo, and engages in a battle that he had absolutely no business fighting.
And the result is identical. The Egyptian archers shoot King Josiah. He is severely wounded. His servants take him out of his war chariot and put him in a second chariot and bring him to Jerusalem where he dies. The entire nation mourns him bitterly. The prophet Jeremiah writes, laments for him.
I am so stuck on this irony. He restores the law perfectly. He finds the blueprints. He purges the idols. Yet he dies mimicking a wicked king, fighting an unnecessary battle, struck by archers. It feels like the historical text is screaming a warning at us. Even the best, most righteous, most systemically minded leaders have a fatal blind spot. Their reforms can delay the inevitable, but they cannot cure human fallibility.
It is a stark reminder that personal righteousness does not grant immunity from foolish geopolitical decisions. And with Josiah's death, the final restraining wall holding back the flood of consequence is broken. Which brings us to the inevitable collapse. The accumulated momentum of a fractured foundation, centuries in the making, finally gives way.
And to understand the speed of this final collapse, we have to look backward for just a moment to Josiah's grandfather, Manasseh. I mentioned him earlier. Let's look at his reign, because the cultural damage he inflicted is the true reason the nation could not be saved.
Manasseh ruled for 55 years. That is over half a century of relentless, normalized evil. He rebuilt the high places Hezekiah had destroyed. He raised altars for the Baals. He observed times, used enchantments, used witchcraft, and consulted spiritists. He literally took a carved idol and placed it squarely inside the house of God.
He didn't just tolerate idolatry, he state-sponsored it. The text says Manasseh seduced Judah to do more evil than the pagan nations God had originally destroyed to give them the land. And the consequences are brutal. The commanders of the Assyrian army come against him. They don't just defeat Manasseh, they humiliate him. They capture the king, put actual hooks in his nose, bind him in heavy bronze fetters, and drag him away to a dungeon in Babylon like a wild animal.
But here is where the Chronicle throws us a massive, almost incomprehensible curveball regarding human grace. In his absolute affliction, rotting in a Babylonian dungeon, Manasseh genuinely humbles himself. He repents deeply. He prays to the God of his fathers. And against all odds, God hears him. God accepts his entreaty and miraculously restores him to his kingdom in Jerusalem.
It's an incredible story of personal redemption. Manasseh spends his final years frantically trying to undo the damage he caused. He tears down the foreign gods, takes his idol out of the temple, builds up the walls, and commands Judah to serve the Lord.
It is beautiful on a personal level, but it highlights a terrifying, tragic reality. Personal repentance does not always undo systemic damage. Manasseh was personally forgiven, but the cultural rot he normalized into the fabric of the society for half a century was irreversible. He tried to turn the ship, but the momentum of 50 years of idolatry was too strong. As soon as he died, his son Amon went right back to the idols and was assassinated by his own servants in 2 years.
And so, after Josiah's brief, brilliant attempt to hit the brakes, the descent following his death is dizzying. We see a rapid-fire succession of weak puppet kings. Josiah's son Jehoahaz lasts 3 months before the king of Egypt opposes him, finds the land heavily, and carries him away to Egypt.
The Egyptian king installs his brother, Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim lasts 11 years doing evil before Nebuchadnezzar, terrifying king of Babylon, comes up, binds him in bronze fetters, and carries off the articles of the house of God. Then Jehoiakim takes the throne. He lasts exactly 3 months and 10 days before Nebuchadnezzar summons him to Babylon.
It's a geopolitical meat grinder. Finally, Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah, making him swear an oath of loyalty. Zedekiah is the last king. He is 21 years old, and he decides to rebel against Babylon. He stiffens his neck. The chief priests and the people follow suit, transgressing more and more, defiling the house of the Lord.
God is described as having compassion on his people. He continuously sends messengers and prophets to warn them, trying to pull them back from the brink. But the text gives us a truly haunting sentence describing the response of the culture. They mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed of his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy.
Until there was no remedy. It is the terminal diagnosis, the point of absolute no return. The Babylonian army arrives, and this time, there is no Hezekiah to pray, no angel to deliver them in the night. The Babylonians have no compassion on young man or virgin, on the aged or the weak. They slaughter the people right inside the sanctuary of the temple.
They systematically dismantle everything. They take all the treasures of the house of God, the treasures of the king and his leaders, and carry them to Babylon. And then they burn the house of God to the ground. They break down the massive walls of Jerusalem. They burn all its palaces with fire and destroy all its precious possessions.
The grand build of Solomon, the 50-shekel gold nails, the massive cherubim, the 18,000-gallon bronze sea, the walls repaired by Hezekiah and Jotham, the temple cleansed by Josiah. Centuries of history, blood, and brilliant engineering reduced to ash and rubble. The survivors who escape the sword are carried away to Babylon, where they become servants to Nebuchadnezzar and his sons.
It is a total systemic collapse. But the text doesn't just record the tragedy, it gives us an absolutely fascinating, profound reason for the duration of this exile. It says they were carried away to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years.
We have to dive deeply into this concept because it is staggering. The land enjoying her Sabbaths. According to the ancient law of Moses, the blueprints, Josiah found that people were commanded that every 7th year, the agricultural land was to be left completely fallow. No planting, no harvesting. It was a mandated Sabbath rest for the ecosystem.
But for centuries, during the relentless, exhausting drive for wealth, security, military dominance, and power, the kings and the people completely ignored this rule. They extracted constantly. They demanded maximum yield every single year. They never allowed the system to rest. They accumulated a massive debt of unfallowed years against the land itself.
That is a wild, terrifying concept.
Yeah.
Is the historical text suggesting that if you do not voluntarily take your mandated rest, the system will eventually force you into a 70-year timeout to balance the books?
Exactly. It views the Babylonian exile not merely as a punitive political disaster, but as a necessary ecological and spiritual reset. It is the universe aggressively balancing its ledger. It's like extreme sleep deprivation. You can cheat your biology for a while. You can drink caffeine. You can push through the exhaustion. You can maximize your output. But eventually your body will just shut you down. It will force you into a hospital bed to take the rest you refuse to give it.
You can only borrow against the future for so long before the debt comes due. The land finally got the 70 years of rest it was owed, and the people who relentlessly refused to give it were forcibly removed from the equation so the healing could happen.
But the chronicle doesn't end in the ashes, or in the silence of an empty, fallow land. There is a deeply moving post-credits scene. The book ends decades later, but it doesn't end with the King of David's line. It ends with a foreign ruler, Cyrus, the king of Persia, who has just conquered Babylon.
The narrative arc here is profound. Cyrus issues a written proclamation throughout his entire empire. He declares, "All the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah." He then issues an open invitation to any of the exiled captives who wish to return. "Who is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up."
We started this deep dive with Solomon, the son of David, standing at the peak of absolute human wealth, building the most glorious temple on earth. We watched that temple get fractured by a young king's ego, defiled by idols, actively boarded up by Ahaz, scrubbed clean by Hezekiah, repaired by Josiah, and utterly burned to the foundation by Babylon. And it ends with a Persian king, a foreigner, commanding it to be rebuilt from the rubble.
It proves a fundamental reality about the systems we build. Human wealth, political power, and even the most seemingly invincible dynasties are incredibly fragile. They are susceptible to the slightest echo chamber, a single moment of pride, or a fatal alliance. But the foundational truths, the blueprints, can always be recovered. The truth ultimately outlasts the buildings we construct to house it.
The physical empire was destroyed, but the identity of the people, anchored in those recovered blueprints, survived the fire and the exile.
What a dizzying, overwhelming journey. To everyone listening to this deep dive right now, I want to leave you with a few things to process. Think back to the reign of Josiah. The most important instruction manual for the entire kingdom was lost inside the very temple it was written to govern. People were walking past it every single day, carrying out their religious duties, completely ignorant of the foundation buried in the rubbish right beneath their feet.
It's a powerful image.
It is. What foundational truths, what core values or blueprints in your own life, your family, or your organization have been lost under the rubbish of daily operations? Are you just busy maintaining the walls of your life, making sure those bronze shields are polished for the public to see, while completely forgetting what the building is actually supposed to be used for?
That's the real question.
And finally, consider the Sabbath of the land. If the land will inevitably demand its Sabbath, what rests, what necessary pauses are you currently denying your own system in the pursuit of maximum output? Because the history of Judah tells us with terrifying clarity that the ledger always balances in the end. It is entirely up to you whether that balance happens through chosen, deliberate rest or forced, catastrophic exile. Take a look at your own temple. Dust off those blueprints.